Welcome everybody, my name is Josh Justice. I am the gallery coordinator from Mott Community College's Fine Arts Gallery, and welcome to Art Talk, a series of conversations that we talk to educators, historians, and professional artists and delve inside their creative process. These talks are brought to you by the Ballinger Trust. Today, we are welcoming Cynthia Gregg. Thank you.
Hey, Josh.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, good.
Good. Let's discuss your exhibit, Returning. How did you develop this exhibit?
Okay, that's a great question. Because this really evolved out of work that really now is really only an image that's outside the gallery right now, where I was working on photographing and documenting the migrant workers' housing that was built in the 40s and 50s for workers usually coming from Mexico, sometimes Texas, and also African Americans came up north to pick fruit, cherries, apples, peaches, blueberries down near South Haven area. And I was really drawn to them because when I would come up to visit family and vacation in northern Michigan, we would approach town and I would see these long concrete cinder block structures. And I was like, what are those? And people were living in them, but I really never saw them because they were out in the orchards. But I was really struck by their sort of simplicity, and they were just so different than anything else around there. And then I did see and learn about the workers over time as I got older. But I would document those buildings because there was this repetition of structure, usually concrete, sometimes corrugated metal, and the repeated doors, sometimes with a number corresponding to one window, sometimes two, one on the other side. And in some, I've actually been inside, and again, cinder block. If you see one that has the furniture still, it often has maybe like 4 to 6 bunk beds. Sometimes they're double. So you're sort of imagining like a 20 by 20 space or a 10 by, not 10, maybe 15 by 20 space too. There's different sizes. Like maybe there's definitely more than 8 people in them because there might be, 6 beds and each one, at least 2. So but anyway, I was really in the, bare cinder block walls, cement floors, one bare light bulb, a shelf, and people I discovered when I'd walk into some of the ones that were still extant, like people would sort of make makeshift furniture. There might be a crate to sit on, or there might be shelves that they made out of crates, disassembling them, and it would say Texas on it. Somebody had scratched it in, like a reminder of home, or something. So, but anyway, and I started to notice too that those buildings, as I actually was getting more into the project of documenting them, they had a striking, odd resemblance to the mid-century motels because the repetition of the doors, the numbers, the window. And I thought, what an unusual contrast, where people who are living in the United States, whether in Michigan or Illinois, coming up to vacation, sun and swim, there's people coming from the south to the north, from Mexico, Texas, and they're coming to work. And like the contrast of our journeys, I guess I would say. And then as I worked on those photographs, I do live across from a former cherry orchard, which I no longer do because he changed his crop into corn to feed cattle. But we lived across, and they would have a cherry orchard burn. He'd cut down the trees this one time. I guess it was because he was changing his, his crop. So he raised all the trees. He created these huge piles of, stumps and branches. And then there was this big cherry orchard burn of about, I don't remember, it was like 8 to 10 huge piles of trees. And after he burned all those, I was walking down the road and I saw a stump, and you've seen those, they were part of the installation. And I was just really struck by, I kept on driving by, and just something about it called to me. And I finally went out and picked it up, and then I was just like in awe of all that burnt texture and what fire does to wood. And it was just, the texture was so incredibly detailed and textured, and it had some sort of, just sort of sense of time and soul. And it was like this, I know it's not a survivor, but it was like a relic from this living orchard that actually I didn't know at that point he wasn't going to replant. So I was really drawn by that. And so I started to go around, and after any orchard burn, I'd pick up a stump, a cherry tree stump from there, or an apple tree stump from another one. And I really was drawn to the form that seemed like some sort of ancestral relic or totem, you know.
You talk about the relics, and each one of them, as we were setting them up, had such a, we were deciding where to put each one, and had such a specific place, and how it felt and how it flowed, and how, even with the pictures of them, you get kind of a feel of like the individuality of each one. Can you describe that?
Yeah, no, I think that is true. I mean, I think you can't deny there's a certain anthropomorphism of them, and I wanted to embrace it instead of ignore it, you know. And I do see them as these sort of ancestral figures that relate to the land, but also relate us to the land, and it acknowledges that the workers are connected to the orchard and the land. We and our ancestors are connected to the land and time, and that it's something we share in common. And I'm very interested in this connection between people and place, especially during a time when, the current political situation often tries to divide us by whatever means necessary. So, and one of the things I think you see in agricultural cycles or just in nature that we are part of too is the cyclical nature, that there's this, there's the seasons, there's the sun coming up, the sun going down, so these cycles. But then I also see the migrant workers who come up to work the orchards or the fields. I'm focused on the orchards, but
as we see.
Yes, as we see here. And they are returning every year seasonally as well. And some people who work in the orchards do live here year round, but I think it's the majority. I think the people I've been working with lately, the crew, they've told me that they stay about 6 to 7 months. And what I didn't know, I mean, that I'm sort of jumping around, but here they're picking apples from an apple orchard. But I knew that they pruned sometime in November, but what I didn't know is they also prune in the winter, which I have a photograph of that too. So what happened when I really wasn't thinking about photographing people and the migrant workers, and I do see them every once in a while. But one time when I was coming back from vacation, we were driving down this road, and I told my husband to stop because I was like amazed. There were like 50 orchard workers on a beautiful cloud-filled sunny day in this apple orchard, and I just got up on the car and took a wide shot at first, and I was just, wow, they're just like, they're rhythmically integrated into this orchard, and they're moving so like beautifully and fluidly, and it just, as soon as I think I got a shot, they're already moving to the next one, and then there were these ladders because they're picking on the tops of the trees, and the ladders would move, so I'd really have to get a shot right at the right moment. But then I went closer in, and I asked some guys if that was okay if I took their picture. And I speak a little Spanish, enough to communicate, to take photos and stuff, and people are they want to communicate, it seems, so it's not that hard. And they said, sure, so I got in a little closer, but it was my first time, But, and I was sort of near the end of the season. I think this is like mid to late September. So anyway, but I like with this photograph, I like that you sort of see the different aspects of it. You see the workers picking, you see, these two close up, and then you see these guys spread out here in the distance, and then the one guy who's with the crate of, I'm trying to remember, there's another, I'm trying to remember the word for it, all of a sudden I forgot. It's not called, anyway, but the guy who's got the crate, sort of filling it up, and so yeah, that's what that is for me. It just, I love the rhythm. It sort of reminds me of a Bruegel painting in some ways, where there's a little bit of a view down to a group of people, where his might be dancing, you know, the one painting in the DIA, or, but it's just, to me, I'm not trying to objectify them, but what I do think is, what I also noticed is that they're, on that first time, and also here, the music is playing. There's this, you know, lighthearted banter going across the orchard tops, and people, they really seem to be enjoying this hard labor. I mean, while they enjoying themselves while they're undertaking this very, you know, hard manual labor, getting up and down the ladder. I can't imagine doing it. You know, just when we set up the show, going up and down the ladder, you were doing it. That's a lot of work. So,
And I'm sure if you could see like a top down, like a drone shot of it, it would almost be like analogous to like bees in a hive. You know, everybody's got a job, everybody's working towards a common goal. You know, do you kind of feel that with this kind of work?
yes, I do. They're working in rhythm and tandem with each other. I mean, I've been photographing them now pruning as the weather gets warmer, because they have to pick up the pace. I mean, they always are going really quickly, but they have to bring in machines because the trees are going to start budding pretty soon. So yeah, it definitely is this amazing rhythm of that I hope my more recent photos are going to show. There's this, you know, this rhythm of working in tandem, that they, you know, that one guy has his ladder, he sets it up, the other guy sets his up, they pick, the one guy finishes a little bit before, the other guy goes down, the other guy comes, he goes up the other. It's this up and down rhythm, you know, and it's amazing. I mean, and to me, it just seems to be
Kind of a dance?
yes, a dance, and also reflective of nature's rhythms, you know. So
Yeah, as I was reading your statement on it, it almost felt like poetry. It almost felt like poetic how the workers were like symbiotic to the plants, and then the plants were like,
yeah,
it's all like a constant flow of, you know, the workers need the plants need the workers, the pruning, you know, every step of the process, you know, it needs the next step. It's always a supply
yes,
of, you know, helping each other out like a community.
yes, exactly. No, it's so true. And I mean, that's the other thing, you know, that they are very much integral to our economy, to our livelihood, our quality of life, that these people bring food to our table. If you cut out, you know, the middleman.
Right. So let's move on to some of the pictures of the relics, and how, like, say a picture like these two, you're going for a certain angle, and we talked about like seeing things in the wood and whatnot. How many different angles did you try for each one? Like, you got your light sources coming from this way. Did you try it spun maybe, you know, another 30 degrees or so? Did you try it on, because when we were setting it up, we were trying to different angles, different ways that they set up. But when you were taking the pictures, like, how did you decide like this?
Well, that's a great question. Usually I took at least 2 or 3 shots, because I look at the stump and I have an idea already what I thought would work, but then sometimes it didn't work with the light, and it didn't capture what I was really seeing, because I'm really interested in the texture, I'm interested in the form, and how that light accentuates and brings your attention to that. So yeah, what I do actually is I photograph with a bright sunlight and with a strobe, and then I work on black background, and like a black velvet background, and I move it around. I actually, when I'm photographing, a lot of times I use stones to keep it upright. Sometimes they'll stand upright on their own, but I'll see if they stand upright on their own, and sometimes that gives me a direction to go in. But I'm looking at, you know, I like to have sort of a back or side light to it to accentuate the light and the edge and some of the you know, unique qualities that sort of seem more anthropomorphic, I guess. Like this one to me seemed very like it was twisting, even though it's a stump, right? And I think that's what's interesting about fire too. I think the way it dematerializes matter, it transforms it into something that it would never look like otherwise. And these look like this might have even started to get some insects that bore into the wood a little bit, because that might have been from a burn that I found, a pile that I found later. I'm trying to remember, but.
And then you also touched on in your statement that these were on indigenous lands.
Yeah. So we live in northern Michigan on the west side on the Leelanau Peninsula, and that's specific. And I think the park system and the county is very good about acknowledging that this is Anishinaabe territory and ancestral land. And there still are, communities that live there and tribal communities. And I think about that, that, well, they also, hunted and grew on that land, and that we are there now. So there's that continued connection that interconnects us between the land and time and history. And yet sometimes when we talk, we're always sort of categorizing people and places. And I understand the, brain's need to do that, but at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that, the people who came before us, and also, to acknowledge that we have ancestral traditions and cultural traditions and family traditions that, they're parallels to other cultures. So,
yeah, it all seems to be interconnected and not so diverse. Like we're all like there's little pieces of each, tradition and whatnot that's from somebody else. Like it's all, kind of a melting pot of it.
Yeah. So
now when we had, we obviously have the lights on a little bit more for,
right.
video purposes, but when we had the lights on for the gallery, we had it way down low. And I thought that was an interesting choice because it pulled you in, like it made you like look closer to the detail because there was less light in here. Was that an intentional choice?
Well, it was what I would hope. I sort of had this imagined space, and it was inspired by a little bit different because Hiroshi Sugimoto, he had an exhibition at the De Young Museum. It was beautiful, but they had painted the walls gray, but he had the lights very dramatically lit on the photos, and a lot of times they did have a black backdrop. And it does really draw you in to focus on, and for me, it's about meditating on an image and getting lost in the image and seeing the detail for what it is. Like there's not just the wood, there's the little pieces of grass, or sometimes there's a cobweb from a spider that's, in fact, actually after I cleaned the stumps before I sealed them so that we didn't get charcoal all over our hands, I found little spiders running in and out in my sinks, at my studio sink. So that was, they were still living, living pieces of organic matter. So.
Very cool. So let's move on to the back wall back here, where you have some more of the branches, and also you entitled this one Jesus?
Jesus, yeah, and it is actually, it's because it is the photographs of a migrant worker, Jesus, who I asked him if he could photograph his hands because he was in the process of finishing up, and he just put his hands. I didn't give him any directions, and I just sort of thought, oh, is that just elegant and beautiful? And it's a gesture of offering without even asking him. But that was sort of what I felt about that particular image. And then these actually are roots. They're apple tree roots that I pulled from a burn pile of an apple orchard that had been raised. It was pretty old. It was beautiful looking because all the trees were very gnarly and big, but I think they weren't fruiting or weren't being pruned, so they weren't fruiting as much as they expect from them. So but when I photographed them, I just had this idea of them suspended as if they were sort of in a void, like you could see them underground, like you could see what you can't see normally about the tree. Because you think about the treetops or the leaves or the fruit, but I liked that when we were putting them up, there was this, I wanted to have them, when I photographed them, I wanted to have them echo the hands that I had already photographed. But I wasn't sure if they should reverse the echo, and we talked about it, and I think it really was stronger to have them really sort of parallel the gesture of the hands going
brings you in.
Inward, yeah. So.
And you had mentioned that some of the, when you were walking through kind of the forest, the meadowy area, that you had found stumps that were continuing to produce fruits. That
Yes.
They were, the survival of the plants, the trees, kept going even after, they should have been dead.
Yeah, no, so that's, we have a field on our property, and we knew it had been we were told it was a former cherry orchard, but what we discovered is it's actually cherry and plums, and only because last year, after I'd pruned them for a year and fertilized them for 2 years, the tree really fruited and dramatically, and there were like 50 plums, but they were very small. They're like this big. But yeah, so that had been a former fruit orchard, and there were sort of a few stumpy, lichen-covered trees, and I didn't really know what they were. I assumed they were cherry trees because we've been told that. And then and I'd heard a friend who lives in the UP that there was a abandoned apple orchard near them, and this guy decided at one point to just fertilize them, and it was next year immediately. He said they started fruiting next year. I was really surprised. He must have pruned and done some other stuff, but so that's why I decided to fertilize and prune the few trees we had that I hadn't seen any fruit on, and except maybe one or two. Mm-hmm. And then the following year, in the next, I can't remember, last year they fruited quite a bit. So that was, it was sort of the endurance and persistence of nature that was really inspiring to me. And I think the other thing about going back to the roots was, it's like you think they're torn from the rest of the tree and the rest of the roots. So there's that idea of being uprooted, and I think of that in tandem with, workers who leave home for a long time, and they leave home for they leave their families and the familiar, language and culture, and they come here to work. And a lot of them do go back, but I think of that experience as part of the experience that they have as well. And what was I going to say about that, though? I can't remember.
Okay. Well, let's move on we have some more of the relics, the various shapes and textures. And now, did you add any burn to any of these, or are these pretty natural to how you found them?
Oh no, I never burned them again. Yeah, I thought at one point, this one isn't 100% black, because in my original idea, I remember thinking, wow, what about a black stump against a black background? And you really have to look to see all that detail. But then I just felt like when I photographed this one and I looked at the print, my proof, I just really loved that it was so different, actually, too. And even this texture is quite different than this really more familiar, sort of, I don't know. Charcoal, yeah. And I just like this sort of sharp edge. It makes me think sort of a crown, or, but I don't know. I think part of it is I like reflecting on the passage of time and the passage of what the elements do to physical matter, because it's a evidence of time, and that we're all part of that. And I know it's always, it's always, I don't know. I think there's some sort of grounding to reflect on the cycles of life and the cycles of nature, and that, there is this sort of birth, life, death, regeneration process going on in all forms of life, including us, which it's,
It's kind of like the plants that need to be clear cut, through fire in order to get the nutrients to, continue to grow. Like it's all kind of necessary to the chain.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that the orchard burns, after the orchard burns, there's these huge piles of, wood ash. And then you see the farmers integrate that into the field for fertilizer because there's a lot of nitrogen and other nutrients in the ash. I'm sure they have a formula about how much they put in and stuff, because I know if you put too much nitrogen, it's not good, but they do recycle that into the soil too. So it really is ashes to ash,
These are very, very cool. Each one has its own, characteristics, its own kind of personality
Thanks.
to it. And even when we were setting it up, the way that, you had, let's put a tall one here, a short one here, so that way they can kind of relate, but also contrast.
Yes,
it's very,
yeah.
very interesting watching the process of how you were putting it all together. So, and then kind of similar but opposite vein as the previous picture, as this one is more in rows, it's more organized, it's
Yes.
less, organic looking, but it's still, part of, the whole process.
Right. Yeah, I know, and that's the one thing. Like, it is interesting because usually you can see that sort of one point perspective from some angle of the orchard, but then there are orchards that they plant them really in an interesting diagonal to the road. So sometimes it's really hard to ever see that from. In fact, that one's like that because it's planted more diagonal to the road. So you don't see this, but I like that it was so symmetrical. And then the pruners, I'm up on this hill where the road is, and the pruners were just, again, it was very rhythmic. It was sort of like this very slow dance, and to see, and then the poles sort of add to it too. And of course, this was more in November when there was, the pruning began.
I've heard it said that when you have, if the way that they line it to the road or like against the road, it's called a green wall. So that way you can't see past, so it kind of keeps it kind of hidden, but it's also kind of hiding the process of, all that work.
Oh, tell me that again.
It's called a green wall.
Oh, interesting.
I believe that's what, or no, a green curtain. That's what it's called.
Oh, interesting.
So if you have like a row of trees right directly in front of the road, a lot of times they'll have crops, but they don't feel that the crops are as aesthetically pleasing, especially like if they have all the workers out, if they have all the tractors and combines and whatnot, that they'll purposely build kind of like this, taller trees that aren't, directly involved in the process of harvesting.
Interesting.
But that way it kind of makes it more aesthetically pleasing.
Interesting. Wow. Because I know they also often divide orchards and crops. It can even be corn sometimes, but with aspen trees, and they're supposed to be sort of windbreakers,
Yeah.
And lately, a lot of them have been raising all the aspen trees, I guess, because they're so old and so tall. Because aspens grow really fast, and so they are really good for creating wind breaking and sun breaking, like shade walls. So that's interesting. I did not know that about the green wall. And it is true, because sometimes that was what was so striking to me when I discovered the first group of workers in that orchard that were like maybe 50 men out there, is that it was the first time I'd seen them picking. I'd seen people tilling the soil and preparing for the season, but I'd seen that many and that open, because it is true. A lot of times I go by and I know they're there and I might see a head pop up or I might see a ladder, but I can't really see them,
And we'll also have a few more relics to finish off this wall. But then as we get to the end, we have the pruning of the trees in the winter months, and also a video you had put together of the workers, as well as the roots kind of intertwining as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. No, the video is called Returning, and this is the crew that I've been working with since around January of this year. So it's newer imagery, and they're very welcoming. I'm going to be able to photograph them doing other aspects, like including picking and maybe doing cherry shaking trees. The other image that was on the screen was a slow motion video of right when they got to the orchard in the morning around 8 o'clock, maybe 8:30 by the time they got all their equipment out. And I was just in awe of this, gorgeous, like gnarled apple tree in the winter snow. And the guys just all came up to it and just immediately got into the groove of pruning together. And they were going around the tree. And it was this, it made me think of a maypole, there was this sort of rhythm of going around. And I had earlier decided that I was going to use a slow shutter with a neutral density filter so I could really get the sense of movement, because I realized that's what I'm really trying to go after, this movement and energy of the labor. And then by combining it with the uprooted roots, filtering the light with red to sort of make it more like blood vessels or life and then I hit my strobe light on it multiple times, just sort of once in a while to give it this sort of animated extra animation or gesture. But they turn to open to show one of the apples from local apples, turning as well to reveal literally the fruits of their labor. But just trying to take things and objects with the roots that you wouldn't normally maybe think to focus on, and then to have us look at them and consider them in some poetic terms and how they relate to the cycles and the trees and the fruiting and the labor.
Because it would be something that you would overlook. It'd be something that you would take for granted, that, not think of how it gets to your table. Like, it's not just an instantaneous, thing in a world where everything else is instantaneous. Like, there is manpower, there is thought, there's process that goes into, the whole ordeal.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, in fact, that I remember hearing a long time ago how, like, a lot of young kids weren't really aware that where food comes from. Like, it comes out of a box or it comes out of a can. I'm sure a lot of kids do know, but I think that it's good to consider and actually pay homage to that process. And just again, the podadores is the word, Mexican word or Spanish word for pruners, but that this work goes on from November until now. Actually, I actually photographed last weekend, and they're still pruning. And a lot of the weather got in the way as part of the problem. Yeah. So they were actually pruning in more than ankle deep water. It was an orchard that was flooded, and they were pruning. They don't prune during lightning and thunderstorms, but they do prune in all weather conditions. In fact, there was I was supposed to meet them a month or so ago, and I got the address, general location. I was pretty sure where it was, and the road that I was supposed to go down, it was all covered with snow. And there was a blizzard coming. I mean, and anyway, so I went back and I came back in the blizzard. It's sort of, what do you call it, a flash storm or something like that. And I came back, and then I saw tire tracks. I'm like, did you guys just get here? I said, no, we've been here. And they'd been there for an hour, but that storm had covered up and they had worked through the storm in a snowstorm. So pruning.
It's something that, it has to be done. So they,
And there's limited time, because as soon as the trees start, budding, they're going to start cutting off potential fruit.
Yeah.
In the next next photographs that I have taken are, they also show the different kinds of trees, because there's also this one called high density trees, where there's espalier. I can't remember if it's espalier, but they're sort of very tightly cropped. The branches are they'd be like this big, on each side, and they're very tightly pruned, and they're a little bit taller, but they produce way more fruit than the traditional, I guess. So, and they take up less space. That's why they're high density. So
your vision of this exhibit, of this project, is kind of continuous, kind of an ongoing thing, as the process of the harvest would be ongoing. Like, yes, you're going to continue taking pictures and continue, finding new relics and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the relics, I maybe will say they're okay, and then I think I'm focusing more on the movement and the energy, and like you say, sort of the dance and rhythm of their work, and to get images and documentation and an expression of the picking of the fruit too. So.
And then we can kind of finish actually where it begins. You have your seedling here, and this is a fantastic photograph. Explain how you were able to accomplish this.
Okay, so this is a photograph of an apple seed I sprouted from a couple of apples, or an apple that I picked from what I call like a roadside orchard that's near our house. And there's a couple of trees left that are apple trees from an orchard that no longer exists. The rest of the trees are gone, but it still fruits and it's not tended. And again, it's about this resilience of nature, this persistence. So I wanted to see if I could sprout the seed, and so I stratified it in the freezer for 8 weeks, and then I put it like you did with sprouts, and you put them between some wet paper towels in the sun in a plastic bag. And sure enough, all of them sprouted, and I took them outside, and I set up my camera and I photographed them. Across in the background is what used to be the former cherry orchard at our house and is now a corn orchard in the fall. And what I did is I call it ascendant. So I was this idea of, that you're seeing the process that you wouldn't normally see, that you're seeing it, the seedling rise and the roots descend, and the seed had just fallen off of that particular part. I was hoping I could get it, but I actually like it this way. And I set it up, and I took dental tweezers, and I just barely touched it on a really windy day, and I got a few photographs, and I probably took about 12 or 20 in the end, and then I just digitally removed the dental tweezers. But it really goes back to that whole process of finding those stumps of cherry and plum trees, now that we know they're plum trees, on the land where they were just little, maybe some this tall, now some are quite big, and maybe this tall, and maybe I found 1 or 2 cherries on them, and I guess now the other one was a plum, but I was just amazed because they'd been neglected for over 50 years, and they were still fruiting. So now that I've fertilized them and pruned them pretty dramatically, last year the plum tree had 50 or 60 plums on it. The cherry trees had 30. It's not a lot, but it's way more than they did before, and it just gives me just inspiration that what looks like it's gone can come back.
And it is the photograph is also kind of related to the roots that you had on the other side of Jesus's hands.
Exactly.
So it kind of also beginning in the relationship of that.
Exactly, like the little twisted roots of the seedling echo the more gnarled roots from the apple tree cherry burn pile, or the apple tree burn pile.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that will eventually grow up to become your apple that you have here.
Yeah.
So tell us about this picture.
Yeah, so this I call pieced work, and I was interested in this idea of, well, how is it, to think about how is it made, and it's organic matter, but I was making it more of a question, where do these come from? What do they mean to us? How do we rely on them? Meaning food. And so my idea was to sort of cut it up into pieces and then put it back as a metaphor for how the parts become the whole, how we each are part of this system of nature that is our planet, and each of us having a role in it. And so I think I was telling you earlier too, I'll tell you the cheat though, is I cut only half of the apple, because if I'd cut the whole, I don't think I could have done it, because once I got it set up and took a few photographs, it fell apart, and I could never get it again, the same order again. And I really like this particular structure with the little sort of opening here, and it's a little off grid. You know, it's
A little
not
bit down
perfect.
here,
Yeah.
that one.
So, but again, it's just that.
It's kind of a wabi-sabi kind of idea of it, the beauty and the imperfections
Yes.
of it. Like it won't ever be whole again, but it still looks good. It does look delicious.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I like that. Well, yeah, and that's really interesting too, because you know that when apples go to market, you know, they're oftentimes waxed, you know, to be shiny and look sort of this idealized version of the apple. And then I also discovered that the high density apples, another reason for that isn't just that they produce more in the same acreage, but that because they have less leaves, that they get more chlorophyll and the color gets brighter in the apples. The sun, I guess, brings out the red in the apples. And I don't know about the other colors of apples because there are some green and yellow ones, but that was interesting.
Very cool. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because this has been a fantastic exhibit to both, you know, come in and take a look every day, but also to help you put it together.
Oh, it's been a joy working with you, Josh. Yeah, all the input and the helping out. No, it's been great. And working on the installation, because that's the first time I've been able to do it any place other than my studio, which isn't big enough for it. But just again, that the relic installation, I call it Begin Again, and the idea of the moving light from the center creates these shadows of the relics as they go across the wall to sort of reference time and reference the cardinal directions with the 8 stumps. So the cardinal and ordinal. Is that what the other ones are? I forgot. But you know, south, north, east, west, southwest, east. So, but to meditate on time and our connection to each other.
Very cool. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And we would also like to thank the Ballinger Trust for helping us put this together. I'd also like to thank Media Services for all their hard work, and the staff, the faculty, and the students here at Mott Community College. Thank you and have a great day.